Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I used to think of myself as a pretty rational person. I didn't buy into ghost stories, creepy chain emails, or those don't go into the basement warnings that horror movies thrived on. I worked from home, lived alone, and my biggest daily scare was checking my bank account after ordering takeout 3 nights in a row. That was before the first flicker. It was a Tuesday night in late November, the kind where the cold seems to gnaw at the edges of your house, making every draft feel like fingers brushing against your skin. I just settled in with my laptop when the desk lamp blinked. Not off, just a brief, almost imperceptible dimming. At first I thought nothing of it. Old wiring, maybe. But then, my laptop screen dimmed too, and so did the TV in the living room, and the oven clock in the kitchen, all of them at the same time. I froze, one hand hovering over the keyboard, the other gripping my coffee mug a little too tight. The lights came back to full brightness almost instantly, but there was something wrong about the way they did, like the brightness was being dragged back into the room instead of simply turning on. A second later, the desk lamp tilted slightly toward me. That's when I realized I hadn't bumped the table. Mara tossed her jacket over the chair and flopped onto the bed. The mattress gave a tired sigh, and the air felt faintly damp, like the room had been sealed for too long. She pulled out her phone to text Tyler that she had made it safe, but just as her thumb hovered over the keyboard, she noticed something odd. The mirror above the dresser, she could have sworn it had been clean when she peeked in earlier, now had a faint handprint smudged dead center. It wasn't her hand. The fingers were too long, too thin. She tried to wipe it with her sleeve, but the glass was cold, far colder than the rest of the room. Great. Now I'm spooking myself, she muttered. To distract herself, she opened her laptop and connected to the motel's ancient Wi-Fi. The signal was weak, but enough to load a couple of news articles about the surrounding area. Most were boring, local fairs, weather updates, until one headline made her stomach tighten. Motel off Route 46 linked to series of disappearances. The date was from 6 years ago, but still the article claimed multiple guests had checked in and never left. No checkout, no trace. The owner at the time was questioned but never charged. Mara shut the laptop. She wasn't here to creep herself out with old rumors. She turned on the TV for background noise, but the static hiss that greeted her wasn't from a missing channel. It was a live camera feed, her own room, from the mirror's perspective. By the 3rd week of Sophie's employment, the station's routine had taken on an unsettling pattern. The day shifts passed in the usual haze of stale coffee and chatter with the other attendants. But the night shifts, those long, suffocating hours from midnight to sunrise, were something else entirely. One Wednesday night, near 2:45 a.m., a light drizzle had coated the parking lot, leaving the asphalt glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sophie sat behind the counter, scrolling idly through her phone, when she noticed a faint movement on the security feed. Camera 6, the farthest one overlooking the edge of the lot, showed 2 uniformed security guards slowly patrolling the perimeter. That was odd. There weren't supposed to be any guards at the station after 10 p.m., not since the budget cuts. She leaned closer, watching the grainy black and white figures as they stopped beside the propane tanks. The taller one turned toward the camera for a moment, but the feed distorted, the screen briefly fizzing into static before returning. When the picture cleared, both men were gone. Sophie blinked and scanned the lot through the window. Empty. Not a single footprint in the wet pavement. She rewound the footage, but the moment they stepped into frame, the tape glitched again. It was as if something had edited them out. 2 nights later, she saw them again. This time, they were walking along the side of the building, almost in sync, their boots not making a sound on the concrete. Both were wearing outdated uniforms, badges with a logo the station hadn't used in decades, caps pulled low over their eyes. She stood to get a better look, her palms pressed against the glass door. The guard stopped at the far corner of the lot, turned toward her in perfect unison, and, though she was too far to make out their faces, Sophie had the distinct, crawling certainty that both were smiling. Her headset crackled. The voice that came through was deep, wet, and wrong. "Go inside, Miss Carter. You're not cleared for this shift." Her skin went cold. She hadn't told anyone her last name. She ripped the headset off and backed away from the window. By the time she glanced at the camera feed again, the lot was empty. Just rain, black pavement, and the constant flicker of the lights. But the headset on the counter, it was still breathing. The next morning, a pale gray fog clung to the treetops, like it had no intention of leaving. Daniel woke in the motel room feeling like his body was made of stone. The floorboards above him creaked, but he knew there wasn't an upstairs. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and told himself it was just old plumbing or settling wood. But that excuse crumbled when he looked at the chair in the corner. His backpack was no longer on it. It was leaning against the door. He was certain, absolutely certain, he had left it zipped and closed the night before. Now the zipper was half open. Daniel checked inside. His camera was still there, but his audio recorder was gone. The only other thing missing was the map. At the diner across the street, the smell of frying bacon and overbrewed coffee hung thick in the air. Locals filled the booths, all speaking in low voices. Conversation stopped the moment Daniel walked in. He took a seat at the counter. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a permanent frown etched into her face, poured him coffee without a word. "You from out of town?" she asked, but her tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. "Just passing through," Daniel replied, trying to sound casual. She studied him for a long beat. "Best keep it that way." A man in a hunter's jacket slid onto the stool next to him. His eyes were bloodshot, and his voice was low enough for only Daniel to hear. "You're looking for that missing girl, aren't you?" Daniel froze. "What makes you think that?" The man leaned closer. "Because I remember when it happened, and I remember what we were told to say." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Told by who?" The man gave a tight smile that never reached his eyes. "By the people who own this town. You think the Blackwood disappearance was a mystery? Number it was a warning." Before Daniel could ask anything else, the man pushed back from the counter, tossed a few bills down, and walked out, leaving his plate of untouched food behind. As Daniel left the diner, he noticed something he hadn't before. A flyer taped to the bulletin board outside. It was weather-worn. The ink faded almost to nothing, but he could still make out the words, "Have you seen her? Last seen. Blackwood Forest. October 18th, 2010. The girl's face was barely visible through the water stains, but her eyes were unforgettable, wide, dark, and looking straight at him. The same eyes he had seen in the photograph on his desk the night before. When he turned to leave, the flyer was gone. The board was bare, and there was no wind to explain it. The night she vanished was one of those unnervingly still summer evenings where the air feels heavy, as if holding its breath. The cicadas had gone silent hours earlier, and the only sounds were the faint creaks of the old house settling into the dark. At 11:42 p.m., the last message from her phone pinged the group chat. It wasn't a word, just a single image, blurry, unfocused, but enough to make the others in the chat uneasy. It looked like the corner of a room, the same beige wallpaper they'd seen in Amelia's bedroom, but in the bottom corner, there was something else, a warped reflection in glass, shaped almost like a face, peering inward. She didn't answer the calls that followed. By midnight, her bedroom light was still on, but the blinds had been pulled down tight. The next-door neighbors swore they saw movement inside, but not from Amelia, something taller, slower, like it was pacing. When the police eventually came, the front door was unlocked. Her phone was lying on the desk, the camera app still open as if she had been mid-photo. The cursed mirror was gone from the wall. its place marked only by two bare hooks and an outline in dust. On the windowsill, facing inward, was a single red thread tied in a knot. None of her friends remembered it being there before, and from that night onward, no one has been able to say for sure where Amelia went. The doll lay on my workbench like a patient under anesthesia, its frayed fabric limbs splayed, one button eye staring blankly toward the ceiling. The lamplight revealed something I hadn't noticed before. Its seams weren't stitched with the usual cotton thread. They were bound with something else, coarser, almost like fishing line, but slightly organic. I leaned in, squinting, the magnifying glass trembling in my hand. The fibers weren't uniform. They were thin strands of twisted hair, human hair dyed black. My stomach clenched. Whoever made this doll didn't just want it to look handmade. They wanted it to hold something human inside it. A faint sound interrupted my thoughts. Not the TV, not the heater. It was coming from the doll itself, a muffled, irregular scratching. The kind of sound a mouse makes when trapped inside a wall. But this was softer, wetter. The air in the workshop shifted, as though something had walked in behind me, silent but heavy. My skin prickled. I turned, nothing but the rows of tools hanging neatly on the pegboard. I looked back at the doll and froze. The button eye had turned, not by much, but enough that I knew it wasn't facing the ceiling anymore. It was looking at me. I dropped the magnifier. It clattered to the floor, and in that instant, the scratching inside the doll quickened, becoming frantic, almost desperate. The fishing line hair thread pulled tighter on its own, the seams twitching as if something inside was trying to push its way out. A whisper rose from the fabric, soft, slurred, like a voice carried through water. "Don't let it out." I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over my stool, my breath catching in my throat. My first thought was to burn it, get rid of it now before the lights cut out. In the pitch black, the only thing I heard was a slow, dragging movement across the workbench, something small, but impossibly heavy, pulling itself closer to the edge, toward me. The hallway leading to the attic felt narrower than Eleanor remembered, the shadows clinging to the wallpaper like damp stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Each step made the old wood groan under her weight, a noise that felt like it echoed far too long, as though the sound was being carried somewhere deeper inside the house. Her candle trembled in her grip, the weak flame bending and twitching in an unseen draft. The air here was colder, not the natural chill of an unused space, but something sharper, like the prick of unseen needles against her skin. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her jaw tightened, and her breath came in short bursts. The attic door stood at the end of the hall. Its brass handle was tarnished black, and the paint around the frame was cracked and curling. For a long moment, she just stared at it, listening. There was no wind outside, but she heard a low, rhythmic sound, like someone breathing just beyond the door. Eleanor's mind fought against the truth. It's the house settling, just the house. But her hand shook as it reached out, and the instant her fingers brushed the handle, she felt it. A faint vibration, as though something alive was on the other side. She opened the door. The attic was pitch black, the candle barely illuminating the first few steps. The smell hit her first, a cloying, rotten sweetness that made her gag. Then came the sound again, breathing, slow, patient. Her light passed over the old furniture draped in white sheets, their shapes hunched like sleeping giants. In the far corner, where the light couldn't quite reach, something shifted. The breathing grew louder, syncing with the rapid thud of her own heartbeat. She took a step forward, then another, her candle shaking so much that wax splattered onto the wooden floor. Her eyes adjusted just enough to make out a shape, human, sitting perfectly still in the shadows. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely more than air. The shape moved, slowly. The light caught its face, pale, hollow-cheeked, its eyes impossibly wide and black, reflecting her own trembling image back at her. And then it smiled. It wasn't a human smile. The candle went out. In the suffocating darkness, she felt fingers, ice cold and impossibly long, curl around her wrist. And in a voice that was not a voice, but a scraping inside her skull, it whispered, "You've finally come home." The attic door slammed shut behind her. The storm hit like a living thing. Rain slammed against the diner's wide windows, making it seem as if the outside world was dissolving into a blur of gray and black. The wind screamed through the cracks in the doorframe, rattling the old ceiling fan even though it wasn't turned on. Somewhere out in the parking lot, a metal sign banged rhythmically, like a slow, mocking heartbeat. Darla leaned against the counter, her knuckles white around the handle of the phone. It was dead now. The sheriff's voice had cut out mid-sentence, replaced by static, and then nothing. No one spoke. They just listened. To the storm, to the eerie whistle of wind pushing under the door, and to something else. A faint, almost imperceptible scraping sound. At first it was swallowed by the rain, but then it came again, closer. Hank grabbed the shotgun from behind the counter. "Stay back," he muttered, eyes fixed on the door. The lights flickered, and for a fraction of a second, everything went black. When they flared back to life, the thing was standing just beyond the glass. It was taller than a man, but its posture was wrong. Its spine seemed to bend too much in the middle, as if it were folding itself down to look inside. Its skin looked waterlogged, pale and sagging, like something pulled from the bottom of a lake. The eyes weren't eyes at all, just dark, recessed pits where water dripped steadily, leaving trails on the glass. Nobody moved. Even breathing felt dangerous. The thing tilted its head, slowly. The motion made the old bell on the diner door jingle, even though it hadn't touched it. Then, without a sound, it was gone. The scraping noise returned, circling the diner, stopping every few seconds, as if it were testing the walls. Then came the smell, a rancid, suffocating odor, like rotting fish and wet earth. People gagged, covering their noses, but the stench grew thicker, heavier, until it felt like breathing decay itself. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, the generator outside went silent. The diner fell into darkness. A bone-deep chill swept through Amelia as the temperature in the room dropped abruptly. Frost traced itself along the mirror's silver edges, like delicate veins of ice reaching for her hands. Her breath puffed out in visible clouds, yet she couldn't move. Her feet felt glued to the floor. The reflection wasn't hers anymore. It wore her face, but the eyes were impossibly black, pools of midnight that seemed to drink in the light. The thing in the mirror tilted its head in a jerky, unnatural motion, and a slow, chilling smile spread across its lips. Her lips. "Why did you call me?" the reflection whispered, though Amelia's mouth never moved. The voice was a low vibration in the walls, the air, the bones inside her skull. Amelia staggered back, but the reflection leaned forward, pressing its palm flat against the glass. From the other side, Amelia saw a shadow behind it, a tall, angular silhouette with elongated fingers curling around the frame like a predator gripping its prey. The glass rippled, once, twice, then the surface bulged outward like a bubble of thick liquid. Amelia's pulse hammered in her ears as one of those elongated fingers pushed through. The air grew heavier, and an invisible pressure pressed against her chest. She knew, without understanding how, that the mirror wasn't just showing her an image anymore. It was reaching for her. Her grandmother's voice, distant and trembling from memory, whispered, "It doesn't just reflect you, Amelia. It wants you." The hand shot out fully now, blackened and skeletal, its nails like shards of obsidian. Amelia tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. The shadow's grip tightened on her wrist with inhuman strength, dragging her toward the glass. She clawed at the floorboards, her nails splintering, but the surface beneath her felt slick, wet, like ice melting into something warm. The reflection's smile widened into something grotesque, teeth sharp and uneven. The mirror began to hum, deep and resonant, vibrating with hunger. Amelia felt herself sliding forward, her body half submerged in a surface that shouldn't have been anything but solid. Cold seeped into her skin, up her arm, into her chest. Her vision blurred as the reflection's mouth moved again, this time forming words she could feel rather than hear. Once you cross, there is no coming back. The skeletal hand yanked hard, and Amelia's world fractured into darkness. The screen was nothing but static at first. Thick, snowy interference swirled across the black background, accompanied by a faint hiss. Then slowly, the haze began to clear. A dimly lit room came into focus, too dark to fully make out, but enough to see that the walls were bare concrete. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling. The camera was fixed at a high angle, looking down into the space like a security feed. Something was moving in the corner. Is that? Tyler's voice cracked as he squinted at the screen. It was someone's back. A person was crouched in the shadows, rocking slowly. Long, tangled hair obscured their face. They weren't speaking, but a faint rhythmic clicking echoed through the speakers, like teeth tapping against teeth. Then, as if hearing them through the screen, the figure's head snapped toward the camera. The face was wrong. Skin stretched too tightly across the skull. Mouth far too wide, a smile cut deep into the cheeks. And those eyes, pale, cloudy, staring through the camera, didn't blink. The thing began to crawl forward. The image glitched violently, colors distorting into streaks of red and green. Each time it froze, the figure appeared closer. One frame, halfway across the floor. Another, just a few feet from the camera. Tyler scrambled for the remote. Turn it off! Turn it off! He hit the power button. The TV went black. Relief came for only a second before every other screen in the house lit up at once. The kitchen microwave display, the dark laptop on the desk, even the cracked phone lying on the table. Each showed the same feed. The thing was now right up against the lens, its pale eye filling the frame. It whispered, but the whisper wasn't coming from the screens anymore. It was coming from behind them. When they turned, the room was empty, except for the faint sound of a bulb swaying in the dark. We'd been on the road for 5 hours, and the mountains had swallowed the last shred of cell signal nearly 40 minutes ago. The GPS had given up somewhere around mile marker 77, leaving us with a printed map folded awkwardly on the dashboard. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. Me, my roommate Caleb, my co-worker Jenna, and her boyfriend Ryan. The plan was simple: rent a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, spend 3 days drinking, hiking, and forgetting about the deadlines waiting for us back in the city. We left later than planned. Caleb swore that leaving after rush hour would save us time. Instead, we'd been threading our way through winding, fog-choked roads well past midnight, the kind where your headlights barely cut a hole through the mist before it swallows everything again. The radio crackled and died about an hour ago, so now it was just the hum of the tires and the occasional rattle from something loose in the trunk. Almost there, Ryan said from the back seat, leaning forward to squint at the map. His voice was more hopeful than certain. Jenna sat next to me in the passenger seat, rubbing her hands together against the chill. God, it's freezing in here. Can you turn the heat up? I nodded, cranking the dial. The air that came through was warm, but it carried that faint smell of old antifreeze, like my car had been holding its breath for too long. We were climbing higher now, the road curling back and forth like a ribbon dropped from the sky. I was gripping the wheel tighter than usual, because the fog made every bend feel like it could hide a deer, or a fallen tree, or... Stop! Jenna's voice cut through the quiet. I slammed the brakes, and the seatbelt bit into my chest. There, about 50 feet ahead, was an old station wagon sitting diagonally across both lanes. It was the kind of car you only see in faded photographs, dull olive green, with chrome bumpers dulled by rust. Its hazard lights blinked in the fog, a slow, hypnotic pulse. Both front doors hung wide open. "Breakdown?" Ryan asked, already leaning forward for a better look. Caleb shook his head. "Doesn't feel right. Why would both doors be open?" The engine was still running. I could hear it, a faint, uneven idle that coughed every few seconds. I eased forward, my headlights spilling more light over the scene. That's when I saw it. A smear of muddy footprints led away from the driver's side, disappearing into the trees. The fog was so thick that I almost didn't notice the shapes moving at the edge of the forest. 2 figures stepped into the road. The one on the left was tall and wiry, his clothes hanging loose like they'd been soaked and dried too many times. In his right hand, he held a length of rusted chain that dragged against the asphalt with a sound that made my teeth hurt. The other was shorter, built like a wall, wearing a faded brown jacket. He had a hatchet in one hand, the blade catching a glint of my headlights. They didn't speak. They didn't wave for help. They just started walking toward us. "Drive," Caleb whispered. Something in me froze. Not fear exactly, but the heavy, suffocating knowledge that if I hesitated, even for a second, something irreversible would happen. I threw the car into reverse. The tires screeched against the wet pavement as we shot backward into the fog. The road twisted and dipped, and every curve threatened to send us into the guardrail, but I kept going. Behind us, an engine roared to life. I glanced in the mirror just in time to see the station wagon straighten itself and lurch after us, its headlights cutting through the mist like 2 hungry eyes. "Holy shit, they're following us!" Jenna's voice was high, on the edge of braking. "They're gaining," Ryan said. "Go faster." I pushed the car harder, the speedometer needle climbing far past what felt safe. The road was a blur of curves and cliffs, the fog swirling in and out of the beams of light. Every time I thought we'd lost them, the glow of those headlights reappeared in the mirror. Then, without warning, another pair of headlights appeared from a side road ahead, higher off the ground, moving fast. "A truck," Caleb said, his voice flat. "They've got a truck." The 2 vehicles fell into formation behind us, one in each lane, blocking any chance of doubling back. They weren't honking or flashing their lights. They were just there, holding steady, closing in inch by inch. Something about the way they moved told me they knew this road far better than we did. Jenna was breathing fast, her hands gripping the dashboard hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Ryan was in the back seat, holding his phone toward the window, desperate for a single bar of signal. We hit a stretch of road where the trees broke on one side, revealing nothing but darkness and the faint suggestion of a drop. I thought about swerving, about trying to make them wreck, but one wrong move would send us all over the edge. That's when I saw it, through the fog, just barely visible. A faint red glow, a sign, neon. We flew around the next bend, and there it was, a tiny diner with a flickering open sign in the window. I didn't slow until the last second, swerving hard into the gravel lot. The tires skidded, spraying stones against the diner's front wall, and we came to a stop inches from the door. The station wagon and the truck slowed as they passed, their headlights sweeping over us like searchlights. For a moment, I thought they might turn in. Instead, they kept going. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, except for a man behind the counter, a heavy-set guy in his 60s wearing a white apron stained with coffee. His eyes flicked from us to the road outside. "Those fellas been after you?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, too winded to speak. He didn't say another word, just reached under the counter. The metallic sound that followed was unmistakable. We stayed there until the police arrived. 30 of the longest minutes of my life. The officers took our statements, asked for descriptions we couldn't quite give, then told us we weren't the first to run into something like this. Apparently, not everyone made it to safety. The police stayed until nearly 3 in the morning. Their flashing lights turned the fog into a red and blue haze, like the world was bleeding in slow motion. We gave them everything we could remember. Details about the station wagon's rusted bumper, the way the shorter man's jacket looked worn at the elbows, the metallic scrape of the chain dragging on the road. But there were things I didn't tell them. Like how, just before we swerved into the diner lot, I saw the taller man lean forward in the passenger seat of the station wagon and grin. I could see the teeth, even through the fog. Or how the headlights didn't just follow us. They seemed to anticipate us, like they knew every curve before we took it. The diner owner, who introduced himself only as Mac, poured us coffee and didn't ask for payment. He'd seen enough to know we weren't in any shape to talk much. Still, when the police were busy outside, he leaned in close and said, "Don't take the mountain back tonight. They know the roads better than you. Wait till morning." We listened, not because it was smart, but because the thought of driving into that dark again made my stomach turn. We stayed in a motel 2 towns over, a place that smelled faintly of mildew and had floral bedspreads older than I was. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 2 silhouettes stepping out of the fog, weapons hanging loose in their hands. By morning, it almost felt like a dream. Almost. We made it to the cabin in daylight, but something about the place felt wrong. Maybe it was the silence, or the way the trees seemed to lean toward the road as we pulled in. Jenna wanted to turn right back around. Ryan insisted we'd come too far to waste the trip. We stayed. That first night, we sat around the fireplace, drinking cheap beer and trying to laugh about what had happened. But when a branch snapped outside, just a single sharp crack, we all froze. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't the wind. I told myself it was paranoia. But when I checked the front porch in the morning, I found a length of rusted chain lying across the welcome mat. No note, no footprints, just the chain. I didn't tell the others. The rest of the weekend passed without incident, but the chain stayed in the back of my mind, heavy as lead. We left early Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the trees. No fog this time, no vehicles waiting in the road. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a state trooper named Harris, the one who'd taken our statements at the diner. They'd found an abandoned station wagon deep in the woods, stripped of plates, its VIN number filed off. It had been burned from the inside out. When I asked if they'd caught anyone, there was a pause. Then, "We're still looking. Just keep your eyes open at night." That was the last I heard from him. Life went back to normal, if you could call it that. Caleb moved into a different apartment across town. Jenna and Ryan broke up. I kept telling myself it was just a weird, isolated incident. But then, one night in late October, I was leaving work and noticed a set of headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing strange about that, except they stayed behind me for 12 straight miles. When I pulled into my driveway, the lights slowed at the curb. The driver's side window rolled down. It was too dark to see the face, but I heard it, a slow metallic scrape like a chain dragging across asphalt. Then the car rolled away, disappearing into the night. I never saw it again, but I stopped driving mountain roads after dark. I don't even take the back roads home anymore. Some things don't follow you just once. They wait, and they remember. I never planned on returning to Willow Creek. It had been 12 years since I last set foot there, and in those years I'd built an entire life far from its damp woods and 2 quiet nights. But then the envelope came, plain, cream-colored, with my name scrawled in sharp, uneven handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single old-fashioned brass key and a folded piece of paper. "It's yours now. Come soon, before it wakes up again." No signature, no explanation. I should have thrown it out, but I didn't. I just sat there on my apartment floor, the key cold in my palm, my pulse picking up like it knew something my brain didn't. That night, I dreamt of the house. In the dream, I was back in the kitchen, peeling wallpaper, warped floorboards, and I could hear the faint sound of breathing, though I was alone. The air moved like someone was walking past me, but there was no one there. Then a shadow, tall and hunched, slid across the wall, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if they were alive. I woke before I could scream. I woke up, sometime past midnight, with the strange sense that the air in the room had shifted. It was heavier now, like someone had turned up the humidity without turning on the heat. My sheets clung to my skin. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't the creak of old wood or the groan of pipes. It was softer, almost deliberate, like someone trying to breathe quietly. I stayed still, straining my ears. In the darkness, my mind played tricks, turning shadows into shapes, the hum of the fridge into distant footsteps. But then I heard it again, a slow inhale, a faint pause, and a barely audible exhale. It wasn't coming from outside my room, it was coming from inside. I pushed myself up on my elbows, my eyes sweeping the corners. My nightstand lamp sat just an arm's length away. But turning it on felt like I'd be announcing I was awake to whatever, or whoever, was in here. Then something shifted at the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped. Not a lot, just enough for me to feel it. I froze. It dipped again. My heart was hammering so loudly I swore it would give me away. A rational voice inside tried to offer explanations. Maybe the bed frame was settling. Maybe it was my own movement causing the springs to shift. But the dips had a rhythm, as though someone was slowly crawling up from the foot of the bed. In the faint glow from the street lamp outside, I caught a silhouette. Low, hunched, moving. My throat tightened, but my body refused to scream. Then, as if sensing my attention, it stopped. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, me barely breathing. It crouched at the end of my bed. The breathing sound returned, but this time, it wasn't soft. It was deeper, closer, wet, like it had phlegm rattling in its throat. I reached for the lamp, my fingers trembling. In one sharp motion, I flicked it on. Nothing. The bed was empty. The room was still. I sat there shaking, clutching the lamp switch like a weapon, wondering if I had just dreamed the whole thing. But then I saw them. 2 damp handprints, small and childlike, pressed into the blanket at the foot of my bed, and the fabric was still warm. By the third night, I'd grown convinced the noises weren't just the usual creaks of an old house settling. The rhythm was wrong. The taps came in clusters. 3, pause, 2, pause, like someone trying to speak in a language of knocks. I was curled up on the couch with my blanket, the TV on low, when I heard it again. This time it was closer and higher up, as if it were coming from inside the wall right behind my head. I muted the TV, holding my breath. 3 knocks. Silence. 2 knocks. I tried telling myself it was mice or the pipes, but then came the whisper, faint, muffled, but clear enough to chill my blood. Let me out. I sat frozen, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The whisper came again, longer this time, dragging the words out like they were being forced through clenched teeth. They locked me in. I scrambled off the couch and back toward the kitchen, my eyes never leaving the wall. That was when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A narrow, uneven seam running vertically along the paneling, as if a section of the wall could open. The edges looked freshly scored, like someone had been trying to cut their way out. Before I could make sense of it, the lights flickered violently, and the whisper turned into a harsh, desperate scream, so loud and sudden it felt like it was inside my skull. I ran out the front door without grabbing a coat or shoes, the scream following me until I was halfway down the driveway. But when I looked back at the house, every light was off, and the seam in the wall, it was gone. The 4th morning of their trip broke gray and sluggish, with low clouds skimming the lake's surface like drifting smoke. Mara woke first, shivering beneath her blanket. The air in the cabin was damp and oddly heavy, as if it had soaked up the lake's breath overnight. She glanced at the others, Alex, Dylan, and Sophie, all still asleep, though Sophie's forehead glistened with sweat despite the chill. Outside, the lake was mirror still, but not empty. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Not fish, not the playful ripples from their canoe yesterday, but slow, deliberate shadows. Mara couldn't tell if they were deep or just below the water's skin. "Hey, guys, wake up," she whispered, her voice betraying a tremor. Dylan groaned, pulling himself up. "What time is it?" "Doesn't matter. Look." She pointed toward the dock. Alex stumbled to the window. What the hell? The shapes were now circling, almost methodical, as if tracking the cabin's position. Sophie joined them, rubbing her eyes. "Maybe it's just logs drifting," she muttered, but her tone lacked conviction. A sudden splash cracked the stillness. Something broke the surface, not enough to see fully, just a glint of pale skin before sinking again. Dylan grabbed the binoculars from the shelf. "Hold on, I think I see." He stopped. Slowly he lowered the binoculars, his face drained. "There's someone under there, watching." They all stared, hearts pounding. The water rippled again, closer now. Alex backed away from the window. "We're leaving. Today. I don't care if we hike out in the rain." But Mara's eyes remained locked on the lake. The shadows had stopped moving. All of them now faced the cabin directly, still as statues beneath the water, and she realized, with a sick twist in her gut, that they weren't drifting toward shore. The shore was slowly, almost imperceptibly, drifting toward them. The night pressed heavy against the cabin walls, as if the forest itself leaned in to listen. Mason sat by the dying fire, the logs snapping in slow, mournful bursts. The radio, silent for hours, gave a single click, not static, not a normal sound, but something like the soft turning of a dial. A woman's voice came through, whispering, breathing, repeating Mason's name in a rhythm that made his skin crawl. "You shouldn't be here," it said, each word drawn out like it was being pulled from somewhere deep under the earth. He looked to Emily, who was sitting rigid on the couch, eyes locked on the radio like she'd been expecting it. "Mason," she whispered back. "That's her." Unable to shake the voice, Mason followed Emily to the back of the cabin. She moved like she was sleepwalking, trailing her fingertips along the wall until she stopped before a bare wooden panel. "There's a door here," she said, even though Mason saw nothing but smooth wall. When she pressed her palm flat against it, the outline of a door began to bleed into view, not like it was being revealed, but like the wood itself was remembering it had once existed. The hinges appeared first, then the frame, then a black seam that stretched upward like a wound. From the other side, something knocked. The hidden door groaned open, exhaling a breath of air so cold it burned. Stairs spiraled downward into a darkness so thick it felt alive. Emily descended without hesitation, her bare feet soundless on the wood. Mason followed, clutching the flashlight like it was the last anchor to reality. The air grew damp. Faint echoes bounced off stone walls. And then they reached the bottom, a massive underground chamber, lit by the dull glow of candles arranged in a perfect circle. In the center was a wooden chair. On it sat a woman whose face was wrong, features twisted, skin stretched, mouth moving in a whisper that made no sound. Emily stepped into the circle. "She's been waiting for me," she said, and smiled. The figure in the chair lifted her head, and the whispering rushed back, flooding Mason's ears. Only this time, it wasn't just words. It was memories, not his own. People screaming, running, being dragged into the woods. The candles blew out all at once. When Mason's flashlight flickered back to life, the chair was empty. Emily was gone. Somewhere in the dark, the radio crackled again. Her voice came through one final time. "Now, we wait for the next one." Mason ran, through the stairs, through the cabin, into the forest. Hours later, hikers found the cabin door swinging open, the radio still on. It was playing a live broadcast, from Mason's perspective, as if someone, somewhere, was telling the story of what was happening to him right now. And then, silence. We had been counting down to that trip for months, 5 years of marriage, and in all that time, we'd never managed a proper getaway. Just a string of rushed weekends and maybe next summers. We were running on fumes, both of us. Mark had been pulling 60-hour weeks at his job, and I was juggling deadlines so tight they left no room for breathing. The cabin had appeared in my late-night search results like a little miracle. Secluded lake retreat in northern Minnesota, private dock, canoe for two. The listing promised peace, silence, and a view untouched by time. The photos showed a low, weathered cabin crouched by the water's edge, its cedar siding turned silver-gray with age. The lake in those pictures was black and glassy, framed by endless pines. The drive took nearly 10 hours. The last stretch wound through thick forest, the canopy knitting overhead until the light dimmed. Then, as if the trees had pulled back a curtain, there it was, Hollow Point Lake, still, endless, too still maybe. The cabin was even smaller than I'd expected, with a wraparound porch sagging slightly in one corner. A woman stood on the porch, wearing a chunky cardigan and a long skirt that fluttered in the faint breeze. Her hair was white, braided neatly over one shoulder. "You must be the Garretts," she said. "I'm Mrs. Keating." Her handshake was cool, light, her smile a little too measured. She led us inside, the air smelling faintly of pine cleaner and something earthy underneath. A single large window faced the lake, its glass old enough to ripple the view. "Baked this for you," she said, setting a loaf of bread wrapped in a tea towel on the counter. "Oh, and if you hear anything strange at night, don't be alarmed. The lake likes to sing." Mark chuckled, thinking it was a local joke. I smiled politely, but the words lodged somewhere in the back of my mind like a splinter. We unpacked lightly, not bothering to fill the drawers. After dinner, bread, cheese, a bottle of wine, we carried 2 glasses down to the dock. The sky had turned velvet black, with a thin crescent moon above the tree line. The water reflected it perfectly, not a ripple in sight. Loons called from somewhere far off, their voices lonely and strange. By the time we crawled into bed, the quiet had settled into my bones. It was the kind of silence you forget exists until you're far from highways and neighbors. I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Splish, splish, soft, rhythmic. I thought maybe a branch was dipping into the water, but curiosity got me up. Careful not to wake Mark, I padded to the window. At first, my eyes struggled with the darkness. Then I saw it, a figure standing waist-deep in the lake, perfectly still. Moonlight slicked across the water, but the figure's head was tilted at an odd angle, as though listening. A cold pulse went through me. I blinked, looked toward the bed to whisper Mark awake, then looked back. Gone. The lake was empty. When I told Mark in the morning, he just smiled sleepily. Probably a fisherman, or a dream, but I knew what I'd seen, and no fisherman stands that still. We spent the morning exploring the lake in the canoe. The water was so smooth it felt like paddling through oil. Across from our cabin stood the remains of a collapsed boathouse, its roof caving into the water. Mark joked about it being prime horror movie real estate, but his voice carried unease. When we got back, the front door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, a trail of dark, wet footprints led from the door across the living room and stopped at the loose floorboard I'd noticed the night before. Mark and I just stood there, staring. We searched every corner of the cabin, but nothing seemed disturbed. That was when I heard it, a low humming, like a far-off generator, seeping up from beneath the floorboards. Mrs. Keating came by that afternoon with another loaf of bread. When I asked if she'd been inside, she shook her head. "Sometimes the lake comes inside," she said, as if that explained everything. Then she changed the subject. That night, Mark double-knotted the canoe's rope to the dock. I watched him test it twice. "Not going anywhere," he said. At dawn, he was standing at the window. "It's gone," he whispered. The canoe floated about 50 yards out, spinning lazily. Mark stripped off his shirt and swam to it. When he climbed back onto the dock, his skin was pale, almost gray. "The water," he said, shivering. It felt thick, like something was in it. That night, the humming under the floor grew louder. Lying in bed, I could swear I heard whispers tangled in the sound. While Mark napped the next day, I drove into the small town a few miles away for groceries. The general store was nearly empty. When I mentioned Hollow Point, the old man behind the counter froze. "You heard the choir yet?" He told me the legend. The drowned choir, people who died in the lake, calling the living to join them. Some swam out willingly, others were taken. "They say Mrs. Keating's husband was the first," he said. When I returned, Mark was sitting on the dock, feet in the water, humming a low tune. It was the same sound I'd heard beneath the floorboards. That night, the humming swelled until the mugs on the kitchen shelf rattled. Mark insisted we find the source. The loose floorboard came up with a groan. Beneath was damp earth, and then water, seeping upward. The smell was brackish, metallic. Before I could react, a pale hand burst from the water and gripped Mark's wrist. The skin was bloated, the nails dark, the grip impossibly strong. I screamed, grabbing his other arm, pulling with everything I had. The thing below made a sound like a drowning gasp trying to speak. Mark's skin tore under its grip before it let go, vanishing into the black water. We didn't pack. We ran barefoot to the car, gravel cutting our feet, and sped down the dark road. As we passed the lake, I saw Mrs. Keating's truck parked by the dock. She stood at the water's edge, her head bent, as though listening to something only she could hear. We ended up at a roadside motel an hour away. Neither of us slept. Mark's wrist had the faint outline of finger marks, already bruising. It's been weeks since we came home. Sometimes late at night I wake to the sound of Mark humming in his sleep. Last night I woke to find wet footprints at the foot of our bed. I never believed the rumors about the old house on Briar Street. Every small town has one. The kind of place kids dare each other to approach on Halloween. The kind of house adults avoid discussing in polite company. This one sat at the very end of the street, where the asphalt gave way to gravel and weeds. It wasn't so much falling apart as it was sagging, like the earth beneath it wanted to swallow it whole. The front porch sloped forward. The windows were smudged with years of dirt, and ivy crawled up the sides as if trying to choke the life out of it. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for a place to rent. The price was ridiculously low, and I'd just lost my last apartment to a rent hike I couldn't afford. The owner, a quiet man in his 60s, didn't seem interested in small talk. He told me the utilities worked, the locks were good, and he could have the place ready by the end of the week. No deposit required. I should have known that was a red flag. The first few days were quiet enough. I moved in my boxes, set up my laptop in the living room, and got used to the strange smell. Not bad, just old, like books that had been left in a damp attic. It was the fourth night when things began to feel wrong. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking up the stairs. My bedroom was on the second floor, and I'd locked my door before going to bed. My breath caught in my throat. The sound stopped just outside my room, but I didn't dare move. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the creak of the stairs again, this time going back down. I told myself it was the house settling, old wood, changing temperatures, all that. But when I checked the next morning, I noticed something strange. Dusty footprints on the stairs that didn't match my shoes. Over the next week, the noises continued. Sometimes it was footsteps. Sometimes it was soft knocks along the hallway. One night, as I was working at my laptop, I saw movement in the reflection of the screen, a dark shape crossing the room behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Then came the voices, faint at first, like a television left on in another room, but there was no TV. I'd catch words here and there, muffled and urgent, though I could never make out sentences. Sleep became a distant memory. The strangest part of the house was the locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway. I assumed it led to storage, or maybe another bedroom the landlord hadn't bothered to clear out. The first week, I didn't think much of it, but one night, while lying awake, I heard scratching sounds coming from behind it. Slow, deliberate scraping, as if something inside was clawing at the wood. I pressed my ear against it and froze. There was breathing on the other side. When I knocked, the sound stopped. I finally asked the landlord about the locked door. He avoided my eyes and said, "It's better if you don't go in there. The key was lost years ago anyway." Then he changed the subject. That night, I decided to try anyway. I took a paperclip and tried to pick the lock. It took longer than I expected, but the old mechanism finally clicked. The door swung open to reveal a narrow, dust-choked room. The wallpaper was peeling, and in the center sat a single wooden chair. Its seat was worn down to splinters. The walls were covered in deep scratches, some long and chaotic, others in strange patterns, almost like tally marks. But the worst part was the smell. Metallic, rotten. I stepped inside, my phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. That's when I noticed something carved into the floorboards under the chair. "Let me out." The door slammed shut behind me. My flashlight flickered. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing inward. I heard the footsteps again, this time circling the chair in the darkness. The tally marks on the walls seemed to shift when I looked away, multiplying. The breathing was closer now, not behind the door, but right beside my ear. When I reached for the doorknob, it was ice cold. Something brushed my hand. I yanked it back and pounded on the door. The wood under my feet creaked, and for the briefest moment, I thought I felt it move, like something was underneath, pushing up. The lock finally gave way when I threw my full weight against it. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping, my heart hammering in my chest. The room behind me was silent, the door swinging gently as if it had never closed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, listening to the faint sound of footsteps pacing above me. By morning, I'd made my decision. I packed what I could into my car and left without looking back. 2 weeks later, I drove by out of curiosity. The house looked the same as ever, sagging, gray, lifeless. But there was a new detail I hadn't noticed before. In the upstairs window, behind the glass, the curtains had been pulled aside, and someone was standing there. They were staring straight at me. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down, and I'll never set foot on Briar Street again. I had driven this stretch of Highway 43 more times than I could count. It hugged the coast like a ribbon of blacktop laid over the edge of the world. On one side, a steep drop to jagged rocks and whitecaps. On the other, a wall of evergreens that swallowed headlights whole. It was just after midnight, and the fog had rolled in thick enough to choke the high beams. My wipers kept up their steady squeak, smearing condensation across the windshield. The plan was simple. Make it to my friend's place in Crescent Bay, crash for the night, and start our fishing trip at dawn. The road was empty, the kind of quiet where even the hum of your own tires feels too loud. I was humming along to an old playlist, fighting the weight in my eyelids, when the shape appeared. A boxy silhouette, cutting across both lanes. I braked, my seatbelt biting my shoulder as the car slowed to a crawl. It was an old delivery truck. White paint, dulled to the color of bone, company logo so faded I couldn't read it. Its hazard lights blinked in steady orange flashes, strobing through the fog like a dying beacon. Both cab doors gaped open. I didn't see a driver. No movement. No flashlight beams cutting through the mist. I should have reversed then. Every part of me whispered it was wrong, but instead I inched closer, leaning over the wheel. That's when they stepped out. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, 2 from the left, 1 from the right, moving slow, deliberate, like they were rehearsing it. Heavy boots scraped on wet asphalt. Their faces were swallowed by the fog, but the shapes in their hands were clear enough. One had a crowbar, another gripped what looked like a sledgehammer. The third trailed a length of chain that clinked softly as it dragged. They didn't say a word. My pulse hit the roof. I shifted into reverse so fast the transmission groaned, tires spinning on the slick road. The car fishtailed before catching traction, and I started backing away, eyes locked on those shapes in the fog. Then the truck's headlights flared to life. The engine roared, deep and guttural, and the truck began to turn. Slow at first, then accelerating, closing the distance as if my panicked reversing was a game they'd played before. I swung the wheel, using the first patch of shoulder I could find to spin the car around. The back end skidded dangerously close to the cliff edge. Then I floored it. The fog swallowed the world beyond my headlights. My speedometer climbed past 60, then 70. Every curve felt sharper than I remembered. I kept expecting the truck's lights to fade, but they stayed in my mirrors. Two burning eyes locked on me. A new set of headlights appeared from somewhere ahead. For a brief second, I thought help had arrived. Then I saw the shape. A dark sedan pulled out from a gravel turnout, slotting neatly into position alongside the truck like they were running a formation. They were herding me. The road wound tighter here, hugging the cliff. A mistake at this speed meant the ocean would swallow me whole. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. The fog made every curve feel like the edge of the earth. I spotted an exit sign, barely visible in the mist. Redwood Diner, 1 mile. I didn't even remember there being a diner here. The truck and sedan hung just far enough back to keep me from doing anything stupid, but close enough that I could feel their presence in my bones. When the neon glow appeared through the fog, it felt like salvation. Pink and blue letters buzzing faintly over a weathered building. The parking lot was cracked and weed-choked, but a single yellow bulb burned above the door. I didn't slow until the last second, pulling into the lot so hard my tires screamed. The smell of burning rubber filled the car. I expected the truck and sedan to follow me in, but they didn't. They slowed at the edge of the lot, idling for a moment like they were deciding. Then they rolled past, disappearing back into the fog. I sat there, engine idling, chest heaving, hands trembling so hard I could barely keep the shifter steady. That's when I noticed the other car. It sat in the far corner of the lot, partially hidden behind an overgrown hedge. An old station wagon, faded green paint, windows tinted so dark they looked black. I could swear it hadn't been there when I pulled in. I killed the engine but left the keys dangling, my eyes flicking between the dark highway and that station wagon. The diner door creaked open before I even reached it. A man in his 60s stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. Thin, wiry frame, flannel shirt, jaw stubbled with gray. "Kitchen's closed," he said, eyes scanning the empty road behind me. "But coffee's hot." I didn't bother explaining, just stepped inside. The place smelled like burnt toast and bleach. Vinyl booths sagged under decades of use. A jukebox in the corner sat dark, its song list frozen in the mid-'80s. The man poured coffee without asking, setting the mug in front of me. My hands were still shaking as I wrapped them around the cup. "Bad night?" he asked. I told him in clipped pieces about the truck, the men in the fog, the sedan joining in. His face didn't change, but his eyes kept drifting to the front window. "You're not the first," he said finally. My stomach dropped. "Not the first what?" He leaned on the counter. "Folks see something like that on this stretch. Blocked road, no driver. People come out of the dark. Some make it here. Most don't." The words made the coffee turn sour in my mouth. "So what is it? Robbery?" He shrugged. "Don't know. Cops don't either. No plates, no VIN numbers, no one caught. And the ones who don't make it here, well, nobody finds their cars." My gaze slid toward the window. The station wagon was still there. "You know who that belongs to?" I asked. He followed my eyes, then shook his head. "Pulled in maybe 20 minutes before you. Never saw who got out. Haven't seen anyone go near it since." The skin between my shoulder blades prickled. The bell above the diner door jingled. A man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a wet canvas jacket. His hair was plastered to his head, and his boots left damp prints on the tile. He didn't look at me, didn't look at the man behind the counter, just walked past, heading toward the restroom at the far end. When the door shut behind him, the diner owner spoke under his breath. "You should leave." I blinked. "What?" "Now, before the fog lifts and they see your car's still here." My pulse kicked up again. "You think he's with them?" The owner didn't answer. He just picked up my mug and dumped the coffee into the sink. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, scanning the lot. The wagon's windows reflected nothing but neon glare. My car looked smaller than I remembered, dwarfed by the dark lot and the road stretching into nothing. I slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors immediately. My headlights cut two thin tunnels through the fog as I pulled toward the exit. That's when I saw them. Far down the highway, barely visible, two pairs of headlights sat side by side in the mist, waiting. My breath caught. One pair belonged to the truck, the other to the sedan. They didn't move, just idled there, engines low and steady, like predators waiting for the right moment. I looked toward the diner. The man was still at the counter, rag in his hands, watching me through the glass. The bathroom door at the back of the diner was open now, empty. The man in the canvas jacket was gone.